The ramp drops into chest-deep water. American soldiers of the 116th Infantry Regiment surge forward, rifles held high, boots searching for footing on the sandy bottom. Within seconds, the air fills with the crack of machine gun fire. Men crumple and fall before they can take a single step on French soil. The water around them turns red. Behind this first wave stretching to the gray horizon, more landing craft are coming. Thousands more. The largest armada ever assembled is delivering an army to the shores of Nazi-occupied Europe. It is the morning of June 6, 1944. The longest day has begun. Normandy. This stretch of the French coastline would witness the most ambitious amphibious invasion in military history. But the road to these beaches had been years in the making, shaped by strategic necessity, bitter compromise, and the urgent demands of a war that had already consumed millions of lives. Since 1941, Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin had demanded that Britain and the United States open a second front in Western Europe. The Red Army was bleeding against the Wehrmacht, losing men by the hundreds of thousands, while the Western Allies fought in North Africa and Italy. Stalin's patience was wearing thin. By 1944, the Americans and British were finally ready to deliver what they had promised. The question was where to strike. The Pas-de-Calais offered the shortest crossing from England to France, barely 20 miles of open water. German commanders expected the blow to fall there, but Allied planners saw opportunity in that expectation. Normandy, further west along the French coast, offered wider beaches, weaker defenses, and proximity to the vital port of Cherbourg. If the Allies could achieve surprise, they might establish a foothold before the Germans could react in force. The challenge was immense. There was no major port on the Normandy coast. The Allies would have to capture the beaches, hold them against counterattack, and somehow supply an army of hundreds of thousands until Cherbourg could be taken. To solve this impossible logistics problem, British engineers designed artificial harbors called mulberries, massive floating structures that would be towed across the channel and assembled offshore. It was audacious, it was unprecedented, and it was the only way. In December 1943, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The American general was not the most experienced battlefield commander available, but Eisenhower possessed something equally valuable. He could manage the egos, rivalries, and national sensitivities of a coalition that included American, British, Canadian, and Free French forces. He was a diplomat in uniform, and he would need every ounce of that skill in the months ahead. Beneath Eisenhower, General Bernard Montgomery commanded the 21st Army Group, which would lead the ground assault. Montgomery was brilliant, abrasive, and supremely confident. He had defeated Rommel in North Africa and believed he could do so again. The plan he helped shape, Operation Overlord, called for the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. 5 beach sectors would be assaulted simultaneously. The Americans would land at Utah and Omaha on the western flank. The British would take Golden Sword, with the Canadians hitting Juneau in between. 3 airborne divisions would drop behind the beaches in the hours before dawn, securing the flanks and disrupting German reinforcements. The numbers were staggering. Operation Neptune, the naval component of Overlord, would employ 6,939 vessels. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, minesweepers, and landing craft of every description. 156,000 troops would land on D-Day alone, with millions more to follow in the weeks ahead. The Allies had achieved air superiority over France after months of brutal attrition against the Luftwaffe. They had naval supremacy in the Channel. What they did not have was certainty. Tactical surprise remained a gamble. Across the Channel, the Germans had been preparing for this moment since 1942. Adolf Hitler had ordered the construction of the Atlantic Wall, a chain of fortifications stretching 2,400 miles from Norway to the Spanish border. Concrete bunkers, gun emplacements, beach obstacles, and minefields lined the coast. Propaganda films boasted of an impregnable fortress. The reality was more complicated. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, was responsible for defending the entire French coast with limited resources. He was a Prussian aristocrat of the old school, skeptical of Hitler's meddling and realistic about Germany's strategic situation. Von Rundstedt believed the invasion would come at the Pas de Calais, where the channel was narrowest. He wanted to hold his panzer divisions in reserve, concentrated inland, ready to counterattack once the Allied landing site was confirmed. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel disagreed. Rommel had been assigned to inspect the Atlantic Wall in late 1943 and was appalled by what he found. The fortifications were incomplete. The defenders were spread thin. Rommel understood what Allied air power would do to any armored reserves trying to move toward the coast in daylight. They would be destroyed on the roads before they could reach the beaches. The invasion had to be stopped at the waterline, Rommel argued, or it could not be stopped at all. Hitler characteristically chose a compromise that satisfied no one. The panzer divisions were split. Some were placed near the coast under Rommel's control. Others were held in reserve, but their release required Hitler's personal approval. On the night the Allies came, that approval would take hours to obtain. The Führer would be asleep, and his staff would be afraid to wake him. Rommel threw himself into improving the defenses. Under his command, German troops laid 4 million mines along the Norman coast. They planted steel obstacles in the sand, designed to rip the bottoms out of landing craft. Wooden stakes topped with explosives, which the Allies would call Rommel's asparagus, sprouted in the fields behind the beaches to destroy gliders. The Desert Fox knew the invasion was coming. He simply did not know when or where. The Allies intended to keep it that way. Operation Fortitude was perhaps the most successful military deception in history. In southeast England, an entirely fictitious army group appeared to mass for an assault on Calais. The first United States Army group, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton, existed only on paper and in German imagination. Inflatable tanks sat in fields visible to German reconnaissance aircraft. Fake radio traffic filled the airwaves. Double agents, German spies who had been captured and turned by British intelligence, fed a steady stream of false information to Berlin. The deception worked beyond Allied hopes. German intelligence became convinced that Patton would lead the main invasion at Calais and that any landing in Normandy would be merely a diversion. Even after D-Day began, Hitler and his generals clung to this belief. The powerful 15th Army, over 150,000 strong, would remain at Calais for weeks, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Those troops might have made the difference in Normandy. Instead, they guarded empty beaches. By late May 1944, both sides were ready. The Allies had assembled the greatest invasion force in history. The Germans had fortified the coast and were waiting. Rommel had done everything he could, but doubts gnawed at him. In a conversation with his aide, he admitted that the first 24 hours would be decisive. For the Allies, as well as Germany, it will be the longest day. On June 4th, those words would prove prophetic. At Southwick House near Portsmouth, Eisenhower gathered his commanders to make the most consequential decision of the war. But as they studied the weather charts, nature itself seemed to conspire against them. A storm was rolling across the English Channel. The fate of Operation Overlord hung on a forecast. June 4th, 1944. Southwick House, a Georgian manor near Portsmouth, served as the nerve center of Operation Overlord. In a wood-paneled library, General Eisenhower sat with his senior commanders as rain lashed the windows. The weather had turned against them. The original invasion date was June 5th. Months of planning had built toward this moment. Troops were already loaded aboard their ships. Paratroopers had received their final briefings. But a deep depression was sweeping across the Atlantic, bringing high winds, heavy clouds, and rough seas to the English Channel. The conditions were impossible. Landing craft would swamp in the heavy surf. Bombers would not be able to see their targets. The airborne drops would scatter across the Norman countryside. Eisenhower had no choice but to postpone. The Supreme Commander faced an agonizing calculation. The invasion required a specific combination of conditions: a late rising moon for the airborne operations, a low tide at dawn to expose the beach obstacles, calm enough seas for the landing craft. These factors aligned on only a handful of days each month. If the weather did not break, the next suitable window would not come until June 19th. 2 more weeks of waiting. 2 more weeks for German reconnaissance to spot the invasion fleet. 2 more weeks for security to fail and the secret to leak. Group Captain James Stagg, Eisenhower's chief meteorologist, offered a slender hope. A brief ridge of high pressure was moving in behind the storm. It would bring a temporary improvement, perhaps 36 hours of acceptable conditions, beginning late on June 5th. It was not ideal. The seas would still be rough. Cloud cover would complicate the air operations, but it might be enough. At 4:15 on the morning of June 5th, Eisenhower polled his commanders. Opinions were divided. Montgomery was eager to go. Air Marshal Tedder had doubts about the flying conditions. Admiral Ramsey worried about the seas but believed his ships could manage. The room fell silent, every eye on Eisenhower. The decision was his alone. For a long moment, the Supreme Commander said nothing. Outside, the wind still howled. Then Eisenhower spoke. "Okay, let's go." 3 words that would send 156,000 men into battle. Eisenhower understood what he was risking. He had already drafted a statement to be released if the invasion failed, accepting full responsibility for the disaster. "If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt," he had written, "it is mine alone." He folded the note and tucked it into his wallet. He would not need it, but he would carry it for the rest of his life. Across southern England, the machinery of invasion lurched into motion. From ports and harbors stretching from Falmouth to New Haven, the Armada began to sail. 6,939 vessels put to sea on the evening of June 5th. Battleships and cruisers, destroyers and minesweepers, troop transports and tank landing ships, landing craft of every size and description. It was the largest naval operation in history, and it was heading for France. The ships converged on a point in the channel that planners had nicknamed Piccadilly Circus. From there, the fleet turned south, fanning out toward 5 stretches of Normandy Beach. Aboard the transports, 156,000 soldiers waited. Many had been at sea for days already, circling in the waters off England while the weather decision was made. The delay had only prolonged their misery. The channel was rough, and the flat-bottomed landing craft pitched and rolled sickeningly in the swells. Soldiers who had trained for years to fight the German army spent the crossing vomiting over the rails. Each man carried 60 to 70 pounds of equipment. Rifles, ammunition, grenades, rations, entrenching tools. Some carried specialized gear. Demolition charges, flamethrowers, radio sets. They were laden like pack mules, and they knew that if they fell into deep water, the weight would drag them under. In the cramped holds of the transports, they checked their weapons, wrote final letters home, or simply sat in silence, staring at nothing. Some prayed. Some played cards. Some tried to sleep. All of them wondered if they would be alive tomorrow. Ahead of the fleet, the minesweepers went first. German mines seeded the channel approaches, and the invasion could not proceed until safe lanes were cleared. 10 channels had to be swept through the minefields, each one marked with lighted buoys for the following ships. It was dangerous, painstaking work, carried out in darkness with the enemy coast drawing closer by the hour. While the Armada sailed, a different kind of invasion was already underway. Shortly after midnight on June 6th, more than 13,000 American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions climbed aboard their transport aircraft. Their mission was to secure the western flank of the invasion, seizing causeways and bridges that would allow troops from Utah Beach to move inland. At the same time, 8,000 British soldiers of the 6th Airborne Division prepared to drop on the eastern flank, capturing vital crossings over the Orne River and Caen Canal. The airborne operations began badly. As the transport planes crossed the Norman coast, German anti-aircraft fire erupted from below. Pilots took evasive action, climbing, diving, and weaving through the flak. The carefully planned drop zones dissolved into chaos. Paratroopers jumped from aircraft flying too fast and too high, or too low and too slow. They landed miles from their objectives, scattered across the flooded fields and hedgerow-lined pastures of the Cotentin Peninsula. Rommel had ordered the lowlands behind the beaches flooded as a defensive measure. In the darkness, paratroopers could not see where the water lay. Men landed in chest-deep water, struggling to free themselves from their harnesses before drowning under the weight of their equipment. Others crashed through the roofs of farmhouses or snagged in apple trees. The 101st Airborne was so badly scattered that some units could not assemble until daylight. Of the 6,000 men who jumped, only 1,100 reached their rallying points by dawn. In the town of Saint-Mère-Église, the chaos was visible to everyone. A building was burning as the paratroopers descended, illuminating the sky and turning the American soldiers into targets. Some landed in the town square, where German troops shot them before they could cut free of their parachutes. Private John Steele's chute snagged on the church steeple, and he hung there for 2 hours, feigning death while the battle raged below. The town was captured by morning, the first French community to be liberated. The cost was written in the bodies that hung from trees and lay crumpled in the streets. Yet despite the confusion, the airborne assault achieved its purpose. The scattered drops actually confused the Germans, who could not determine where the main landing zones were. Reports flooded into German headquarters from every direction, each one describing paratroopers in a different location. Was this the invasion? A diversion? A commando raid? No one could say. Rommel was in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday. Von Rundstedt hesitated to commit his reserves without confirmation. Hitler was asleep, and his staff refused to wake him. The panzer divisions that might have crushed the beaches at dawn remained in their assembly areas, awaiting orders that would not come for hours. On the eastern flank, the British achieved the first clear victory of D-Day. At 16 minutes past midnight, 6 Horsa gliders carrying troops of the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry touched down within 50 yards of Pegasus Bridge. It was a feat of extraordinary precision flying. The soldiers stormed the bridge and captured it within 10 minutes, suffering only 2 dead. The first ground action of the invasion was over, almost before it began. The bridge that would allow German armor to reach Sword Beach was now in Allied hands. By 5:30, the eastern sky had begun to lighten. Along the Norman coast, German defenders peered out from their bunkers and saw something that stole the breath from their lungs. Ships. Thousands of ships. An armada stretching to the horizon, larger than anything they had ever imagined. The naval bombardment began moments later, as the guns of battleships and cruisers opened fire. The ground shook. The sky filled with flame and smoke. On the transports, soldiers climbed down cargo nets into the landing craft that would carry them to the beaches. H-hour was approaching. The longest day had truly begun. The first waves hit the beaches at 6:30 in the morning. Along 50 miles of Norman coastline, the fate of the invasion would be decided in the next few hours. At Utah Beach, on the far western flank, the 4th Infantry Division came ashore in relatively good order. Strong currents had pushed the landing craft nearly 2,000 yards south of their intended target. It was an accident that saved lives. The actual landing zone was far more lightly defended than the planned sector. German resistance was scattered and disorganized. The beach obstacles had not been completed. What might have been a bloodbath became something close to an orderly landing. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. waded ashore with the first wave. He was 56 years old, the eldest son of President Theodore Roosevelt, and he walked with a cane due to severe arthritis. He had begged Eisenhower for permission to land with his men, arguing that his presence would steady the younger soldiers. Now, standing on the wrong beach under enemy fire, Roosevelt made a decision that would earn him the Medal of Honor. He surveyed the terrain, consulted his maps, and declared to his officers, "We'll start the war from right here." Rather than attempt to redirect the following waves to the planned landing zone, Roosevelt ordered the entire assault to shift to the new position. It was exactly the kind of battlefield improvisation that the rigid German command structure could not match. By noon, the 4th Division had linked up with paratroopers of the 101st Airborne pushing inland. By nightfall, 21,000 troops were ashore, and the beachhead extended 4 miles into France. Utah's casualties were 197 killed or wounded. It was the lightest toll of any beach. Roosevelt would not live to see the victory he helped secure. He died of a heart attack 5 weeks later. 6 miles to the east, a very different battle was unfolding. Omaha Beach was a killing ground. The terrain alone made it a defender's dream. A crescent of sand stretched beneath bluffs that rose 150 feet above the waterline. There were only 5 ravines, called draws, leading off the beach to the plateau above. The Germans had fortified all of them. Concrete bunkers housed machine guns with interlocking fields of fire. Artillery positions on the bluffs could sweep the entire beach. Every inch of sand was a pre-registered kill zone. The plan called for naval guns and heavy bombers to suppress the defenses before the troops landed. Both failed. The naval bombardment was too brief to destroy the concrete emplacements. The bombers, flying through heavy cloud cover, released their payloads late for fear of hitting the incoming landing craft. Their bombs fell harmlessly on the fields beyond the bluffs. The German defenders of the 352nd Infantry Division, a battle-hardened unit that Allied intelligence had failed to detect, emerged from their bunkers unscathed. The first wave of the 116th Infantry Regiment hit the beach at 6:30. Within minutes, the assault became a catastrophe. Many of the landing craft dropped their ramps too far from shore, dumping soldiers into water over their heads. Men drowned under the weight of their equipment before they could fire a single shot. Those who made it to the shallows faced a wall of machine gun fire. Entire boat teams were cut down in seconds. The water turned red with blood. The amphibious tanks that were supposed to support the infantry never arrived. These specialized Sherman tanks, fitted with canvas flotation screens, had been launched from their carriers 3 miles offshore. The rough seas swamped them. Of 32 tanks launched, 27 sank, carrying their crews to the bottom. The men on the beach had no armor support. They had no cover. They had nothing but the steel obstacles planted in the sand, and even those offered little protection from the enfilading fire that poured down from the bluffs. By 8 o'clock, the assault had stalled completely. Bodies littered the waterline. Survivors huddled behind the seawall or crouched in the surf, unable to advance. The follow-up waves continued to land, adding to the chaos without breaking the deadlock. Offshore, aboard the cruiser Augusta, General Omar Bradley watched the disaster through binoculars. He could see the beach littered with wrecked vehicles and motionless forms. Reports from shore were fragmentary and grim. Bradley later admitted he considered diverting the remaining waves to other beaches and abandoning Omaha entirely. The breakthrough came not from generals, but from sergeants and lieutenants. Small groups of men, led by junior officers and non-commissioned officers, began to fight their way off the beach. They blew gaps in the wire with Bangalore torpedoes. They climbed the bluffs under fire, clearing bunkers one at a time with grenades and rifle fire. Colonel George Taylor of the 16th Infantry rallied his shattered regiment with words that became legend. "Two kinds of people are staying on this beach," he shouted. "The dead and those who are going to die. Now let's get the hell out of here." The destroyers of the Naval Fire Support Group saved Omaha Beach. Seeing the carnage ashore, their captains brought their ships dangerously close to the beach, risking grounding on the sandbars, to deliver direct fire against the German positions. At ranges of less than 1,000 yards, the 5-inch guns began systematically destroying the bunkers that pinned down the infantry. It was the intervention that broke the stalemate. By noon, small groups of Americans had reached the top of the bluffs. By afternoon, the draws were being cleared. By evening, a tenuous beachhead had been established, barely a mile deep in most places. The cost was staggering. Omaha Beach claimed approximately 2,400 American casualties, killed, wounded, or missing. It was more than all the other beaches combined. Some companies of the 116th Infantry lost 90% of their men in the first hour. To the east, the British and Canadian landings proceeded with less drama, but no less determination. At Gold Beach, the British 50th Division came ashore against strong resistance, but with the advantage of specialized armor that the Americans lacked. Flail tanks beat paths through the minefields. Flame-throwing tanks incinerated bunkers. Bridge-laying tanks crossed the anti-tank ditches. By nightfall, the British had advanced 6 miles inland and linked up with Canadian forces from Juno. Juno Beach was the bloodiest of the Commonwealth landings. Rough seas had delayed the assault, and by the time the Canadians landed, the rising tide had covered many of the beach obstacles. Landing craft struck submerged mines. 30% of the boats were destroyed or damaged before reaching shore. The 3rd Canadian Division fought house to house through the fortified villages of Courcelles and Bernier, suffering 1,200 casualties in the process. Yet by evening, the Canadians had pushed further inland than any other force, reaching within 3 miles of the city of Caen. At Sword Beach, the easternmost landing zone, the British 3rd Division had the most ambitious objective. They were to capture Caen, a vital road junction 9 miles inland, by the end of D-Day. The beach itself was secured relatively quickly, and lead elements linked up with the paratroopers holding Pegasus Bridge by early afternoon. But the advance on Caen stalled. The 21st Panzer Division, the only German armored unit to counterattack on D-Day, struck between Sword and Juno beaches and briefly reached the coast. British anti-tank guns and naval gunfire drove them back, but the momentum toward Caen was lost. The city would not fall for another 6 weeks. As darkness settled over Normandy on June 6th, the Allies clung to a strip of coastline barely 6 miles deep in places. 156,000 soldiers had come ashore. More than 10,000 of them were now casualties. But the Atlantic Wall had been breached. The Germans had failed to throw the invaders back into the sea in the critical first hours. The race to build up forces faster than the enemy could reinforce had begun. The battle for Normandy was far from over. It had only just started. The guns fell silent on the beaches, but the battle for Normandy had only begun. In the days following June 6th, the 5 Allied beachheads slowly merged into a continuous front. Engineers worked around the clock to clear the wreckage of the assault, bulldozing lanes through the debris of shattered vehicles and fallen men. The dead were gathered and buried in hastily dug graves marked with wooden crosses. The living pressed inland, yard by yard, into the heart of German-occupied France. The buildup was relentless. By June 11th, just 5 days after D-Day, 326,000 troops had come ashore. 54,000 vehicles crowded the narrow roads behind the beaches. 104,000 tons of supplies had been unloaded across the sand. The artificial mulberry harbors, those engineering marvels that had been towed across the channel in pieces, were now operational. They allowed cargo ships to unload directly onto floating piers, bypassing the need for a captured port. It was a logistical triumph that made the entire invasion possible. Then nature struck back. On June 19th, a storm swept across the channel, the worst to hit the region in 40 years. For 3 days, gale force winds battered the Norman coast. The American Mulberry Harbor at Omaha Beach was destroyed, torn apart by waves that hurled landing craft onto the shore like toys. 800 vessels were damaged or sunk. The supply flow that had sustained the beachhead slowed to a trickle. The storm set the Allied timetable back by weeks and reminded Eisenhower how narrowly he had threaded the needle with his weather decision. The capture of Cherbourg became even more urgent. The Allies needed a major port to sustain their growing army, and Cherbourg, at the tip of the Cotentin Peninsula, was the obvious target. American forces fought their way north through determined German resistance, finally entering the city on June 26th. But the Germans had done their work well. The harbor facilities had been systematically demolished. Cranes were toppled into the water, coupled into the water. Cals were mined and destroyed. Ships had been scuttled in the channels. It would take months to restore the port to full capacity. Inland, the fighting bogged down in the bocage. This ancient Norman landscape was a nightmare for attacking forces. Small fields were bounded by earthen embankments topped with dense hedgerows, some of them centuries old. Each field became a fortress. Tanks could not push through the embankments. Infantry advancing across the open ground were cut down by machine guns, hidden in the hedgerows on the far side. A soldier might fight all day to advance a few hundred yards, only to find another identical field waiting beyond. The British and Canadians hammered at Caen, the city that was supposed to fall on D-Day. Montgomery launched repeated offensives, but the Germans had concentrated their armor around the city. Panzer divisions that might have crushed the beachheads on June 6th were now dug in among the ruins, fighting for every street and building. The city did not fall until July 21st, 6 weeks behind schedule. By then, much of Caen had been reduced to rubble by Allied bombing. The strategic purpose of the Caen fighting was to fix the German armor in place, while the Americans prepared a breakout in the west. On July 25th, Operation Cobra finally shattered the deadlock. After a massive aerial bombardment that accidentally killed over 100 American soldiers, Bradley's forces punched through the German lines at Saint-Lô. The hedgerow country gave way to open terrain, and the pursuit began. General George Patton, the phantom commander of the fake army group that had deceived the Germans for so long, now took command of the very real Third Army. His forces raced through Brittany and then swung east toward Paris. The speed of the advance was breathtaking. German resistance, already weakened by weeks of attrition, began to collapse. In mid-August, the trap closed. German forces in Normandy, the remnants of the 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army, were caught in a pocket around the town of Falaise. Allied forces pressed from 3 sides while aircraft attacked anything that moved on the roads. The slaughter in the Falaise pocket was horrific. 10,000 German soldiers were killed. 50,000 more surrendered. The fields were carpeted with dead horses and burned-out vehicles. An Allied general who toured the pocket afterward said that it was possible to walk for hundreds of yards stepping only on dead Germans. The German army in France had been destroyed. Total German casualties in the Normandy campaign exceeded 450,000, including killed, wounded, and captured. The Allies had suffered as well. Some 225,000 men had fallen in the fighting since D-Day. The price of liberation was written in blood on both sides. Among the German casualties was Erwin Rommel. On July 17th, British fighters had strafed his staff car on a Norman road. The Desert Fox suffered severe head wounds and was evacuated to Germany to recover. He never returned to command. In October, officers investigating the failed July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler discovered that Rommel had been aware of the conspiracy. Hitler could not publicly execute Germany's most popular general, so he offered Rommel a choice: face a trial for treason with consequences for his family, or take poison and receive a state funeral with full military honors. On October 14th, Rommel swallowed cyanide in the back of a staff car. He was 52 years old. Paris fell on August 25th. The French 2nd Armored Division and the American 4th Infantry Division entered the city together, liberating the capital after 4 years of German occupation. General Charles de Gaulle marched down the Champs-Élysées the following day, reclaiming France for the French. The crowds that lined the boulevard were delirious with joy. Collaborators were dragged from their homes and beaten. Women who had consorted with Germans had their heads shaved in public. The liberation was ecstatic and ugly in equal measure. By September, Allied forces had reached the German border. France, Belgium, and Luxembourg had been liberated. The Wehrmacht was reeling, its losses in men and equipment catastrophic. But the war was not over. The Germans would rally for one final offensive in the Ardennes that winter. The fighting would continue for another 8 months, grinding through the Rhineland and into the heart of the Reich. The men who made D-Day possible did not all live to see the victory. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. died of a heart attack on July 12th, barely a month after walking onto Utah Beach with a cane in his hand. He was buried in the American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer, overlooking the sands of Omaha. His Medal of Honor was awarded posthumously. Eisenhower saw through to the end. He accepted Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, in a schoolhouse in Reims. The note he had written before D-Day, accepting blame if the invasion failed, remained folded in his wallet. He would later serve 2 terms as President of the United States. The invasion that Eisenhower launched on June 6, 1944, changed the course of history. It opened the second front that Stalin had demanded. It forced Germany into the two-front war that its strategists had always dreaded. It sealed the fate of the Third Reich. Less than a year separated D-Day from VE Day. The road from the beaches of Normandy led straight to Berlin. But the cost was seared into the landscape of northern France. 27 Allied war cemeteries dot the Norman countryside. The American cemetery at Colleville-sur-Mer holds 9,387 graves, arranged in perfect rows of white marble crosses and stars of David on a bluff overlooking the sea. The German cemetery at Le Camp, just a few miles away, holds 21,000 dead, marked by dark granite crosses that cluster in groups of 5. French civilians, caught in the crossfire of liberation, lie in village churchyards throughout the region. 15,000 to 20,000 of them perished in the campaign, many killed by Allied bombs meant for German positions. The beaches are quiet now. The bunkers are crumbling. The sand that once ran red with blood is dotted with sunbathers in the summer months. But the memory endures, carved in stone above the shore where so many young men gave everything they had. D-Day was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of the end. The men who stormed those beaches did not know if they would survive the next hour, let alone live to see victory. They knew only that the ramp was dropping, the water was rising, and the guns were waiting. They went forward anyway. More than 10,000 Allied soldiers fell on June 6, 1944. Hundreds of thousands more would die before the guns fell silent across Europe. Their sacrifice broke the Atlantic Wall and opened the road to Berlin. It gave Western Europe back to its people and ensured that the future of the continent would not be written in German alone. Today, white crosses stand in silent rows above Omaha Beach, looking out over the same waters that carried an armada to war. The men who lie beneath them were young once, full of fear and courage in equal measure. They did not ask to be heroes. They simply did what the moment demanded. And the world was never the same.